And winter comes to Fragments of Silicon on schedule, but slightly hastily.
All right, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon. I'm your host, Adam. Joining me, as always, are Eddie and Galix. Right, guess there's no point in lollygagging. Let's get to the news. Eddie, why don't you start us off this week? Because you seem to have more news to give us.
Oh, God. So, basically, the next day after they fired my mom, she found a job at what her hospital calls the Tree House. It's kind of like a mini hotel for people who, have to stay. Their family can stay there or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So she's going to be working there, but her pay is only going to be about $380 every 2 weeks. So, yeah, that really sucks. Supposedly she's going to be on call, so there is the possibility of getting more hours. But at the same time, being on call, there's a possibility she could get no hours a week.
That's not great.
No, it's not. And then, apparently we were informed that they have canceled the hearing to kind of end her workers' comp claim. Because until that, we can't get a settlement.
Mm-hmm.
So, she, this part gets kind of confusing. They want her to go back to her shoulder doctor for some kind of evaluation. And, her, attorney is trying to see if they can get what's called open coverage. So, like, say she needs another shoulder surgery down the line, or she can still keep going to pain management, they'll still cover that. And then just kind of close the case with that. It's again kind of weird, but whatever helps.
Adventures in healthcare.
Yep. Um and then yesterday she signed the employment paperwork for the new job, and I guess they were kind of shocked that she was still also looking for another position, because I don't know if they understand you can't really live off uh
Or that she doesn't have someone else in the house that's also working just like more full time or whatever.
we do, but we still don't make enough to cover all the expenses.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, hopefully she hears something from some of those positions soon. Also, because she was out of work so long, even though she doesn't have insurance through her new job, there she still has to pay back her deductibles and stuff when she was still getting her diabetic medicine and stuff. So that's going to be more taken out of her already small paycheck.
Oh boy.
So yeah, um, yeah, hopefully shit gets sorted out quickly. And I guess I will more than likely have more information start of next year, whether it's he going insane or everything is back to normal. As far as other things, I've been playing Pokemon Violet. I've actually found 3 shinies so far, which
So
is
shinies are a lot easier to get in this gen because all of the Pokemon that exist are visible instead of being rolled randomly.
like I know before this game I've never had a wild shiny encounter. Like obviously I
I
have
mean that is still a little on the high side, but it is a lot more likely that you'll run into at least one in your career than it was in previous. I think I found 4 and I've played a good chunk of it. But yeah, it's because you can see that they're shiny before you can encounter them.
Yeah.
So you can actually, with 0 time, encounter Pokemon instead of it having to be, oh, hey, I walk into the grass and I get into a random encounter.
Mm-hmm. So yeah,
What was it?
I
Or what
have
were they?
the new tarantula thing is one of the shinies. I think.
Striking colors.
Hmm?
That one has very striking colors, if I remember correctly.
For a second, I thought it was an Applin.
Yeah, because the thread wrapped around its butt is all red.
Then I got a Lechonk, the pig thing.
Mm-hmm. In traditional pig colors.
Yes, and then I got a Skiddo.
That's a little subtler, so.
Yeah, that one was like, what the hell? Oh, wait, no, hold on, I know this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's been kind of interesting. I think I'm at the point where I can just say screw it and finish all the gyms. Because I got the bike upgrades.
Have you done the Team Star stuff?
I should also probably do that.
Although I think the last 2 Team Star things are technically higher level than the highest level gym, so.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
yeah.
you can get all the gyms right off the bat. Technically the problem is that the levels get high.
Mm-hmm. And yeah. Other than that, I guess not too much going on other than, the universe really hates me for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I guess that's it for me.
All right. Well, Alex, you're up.
Not too much dramatic here. I had a dentist appointment today and got the last of the teeth reconstruction that they planned on doing way back a few years ago.
Oh man.
Before I started having blood pressure problems.
Mm-hmm.
Which thankfully is under control. So, but yeah, so that'll be the last thing, and got it all done in 2 years, I think. So that's good. Let's see what else. I've mostly been playing Pokemon and Splatoon 3 still. Big Run was fun, but kind of short. But it's weird because being on an actual multiplayer map for the co-op mode is the map design is very different between modes, so had to relearn some things. And yeah, I beat. I'm at what 4 Titans, 7 gyms, and 3 star camps. Trying to decide what to do next, but I've gone back to catch a few of the new guys that I really liked that I hadn't managed to get a good one of, even though it's a lot easier to make any old one that you find good eventually now.
Yeah, because what is it, hyper training?
Yeah, well, hyper training has been in for a few generations, but previously it required a Pokemon to be level 100 to do it. Now it only requires level 50, and bottle caps are way easier to get.
Right.
Likewise, nature mints are a lot easier to find, so. And you can even buy them after a certain point. So, but I still like trying to catch a good one, and it's fun to go around and catch things. Yeah, other than that, not a whole lot. Thankfully, I don't have to worry about family Christmas being at an awkward time because we're doing it the day after Christmas, which is a day I had off anyway, so that's good. And it's a Monday, so it won't affect any major things. Saturday Macross with Mac is still happening. We managed to beat that stage that was giving us trouble the week before. Well, the week before it wasn't just the stage, it was the streaming problems, but that also seemed to have been fixed, so that's good. Anyway, that's what I have going on. How about you, Adam?
All right. Yes, it's my go. Let's see where to start. Yes. I guess I'll go through my medical stuff for the week. That seems to be the theme. Let's see. Well, I had to call up my doctor's office today about, regarding an issue with my medication. Like, um, make sure that was all sorted out. Like, it's been a running thing for a couple of months. Like, basically, what happened is back in October, um, they the office switched vendors from the local Walgreens to a mail order company.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, and they didn't tell me. Like, and I initially thought they were, some sort of robo scan because they called up using an automatic robocall thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we've got your medications here, but I've already got them. And my doctor knows I get them from the Walgreens. Like, so, thankfully everything's been sorted out. I called the company. I'm like, all of my medications coming. Like, though there may be a complication with one of them, though I'll get into with the other thing. Good news is I have finally scheduled an appointment with my PCP in regards to my hand pain for next week, next Tuesday. Like, and mind you, I'm not under any thoughts that I'm going to go in Tuesday morning Tuesday afternoon, and he's going to magically be able to figure out what's going on with my hands, because or at least upper body, because it's like I've had pain in my wrist and my forearm at various points and all that. So, and it's like and here's the thing: it's one of those things that could be a lot of things. It could be tendonitis, arthritis. My pick would be peripheral neuropathy, but there are some things that dissuade that. Like, I've been feeling quite a bit of pain, not so much numbness or loss of sensation. Like, no, my hands certainly, I'm still able to feel everything. Weird as that sounds. Like, one potential concern is one of the medications I'm taking, atorvastatin, I believe it's pronounced, or you might know it as Lipitor. The cholesterol medication. One of the serious side effects is muscle pain, which can lead to apparently muscular atrophy. Like, and apparently my mother's been dealing with the same with her medication. So that may be a cause. It might be connected. It might not even be something going on with my hands. It might be connected with my neck, a slipped disc, herniated disc.
Not that you're paranoid or anything, or whatever the word is. for when you get worried about stuff.
It's like, well, what I do know is that my hands, nerve endings keep firing off pain signals, various points. So I know something's going on, and hopefully I can get to the bottom of it. Like I said, I'm not exactly sure if my my regular general practitioner is going to be able to have the expertise to figure that out. Probably going to need to go to a specialist there, like like an orthopedic surgeon, a neurologist, pain doctor, pain specialist, something to that effect. And it's like this pain could be chronic, or it could clear up in a couple months. It's like a lot of unknowns. A lot of unknowns here. Like, though I suppose, on that note, once again, I will reiterate, if I do have to not play games for medical reasons, yeah, I won't be able to do reviews during that time. But Petty and Galax will still be doing their reviews at the very least. Just throw that out there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's my news for the week. So merrily we shall roll along to the interview portion of the broadcast. And joining us this week are Jared Hoag and Dominic from Something Nerdy Studio.
Hello.
Hello, hi.
Okay. Right. So how we like to get started is we like to get to know the people behind the games, behind the studio, and so on and so forth. And we start that journey by asking this particular question: what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
Oh gosh, I guess I'll take that first. So I started about as early as possible with video games. I was born in '81, so the Atari 2600 was hot at the time, and my parents tell me that I started playing Atari games when I was about a year and a half old. So it's just kind of been in my blood most of my life. When I got my first computer at 5, not quite 6 years old, I taught myself how to program it, and I started teaching myself how to create video games. Like, I would go to the library and just check out books on video game design and programming. And at the time, they would print source code to things in like little computer magazines and periodicals and newspapers and stuff like that. So I kind of got little snippets of code that way, and just kind of bootstrapped my way up from basic and logo programming languages. And I was really inspired by the Sierra games, like the King's Quest games in particular. So I made a bunch of games in BASIC that were inspired by those. And I made some other random kinds of games, like kind of a shoot 'em up game, a pinball game, things like that. So yeah, like creating video games on a hobbyist level was definitely a part of my childhood for quite a bit of it. When I went into college and everything, I became a mathematician instead of a computer science major. But a few years into my career, I was able to turn it back to programming, and I became a software engineer. And did a stint at IBM and a few other companies, and did pretty well. But it wasn't the video game industry, unfortunately. Even though, that would have been nice, I guess. Although I've heard that it can be hell to work for the big game houses. But at some point, I had been learning some advanced computer science from Dominic, because he had kind of self-studied a lot of really cool topics, and I was kind of like beefing up my skills, and my financial situation got stable enough where just the idea of a startup became feasible. So I approached Nick, or Dominic, and proposed this idea of creating a business out of it. And so we did that, and we kind of came together in that way at the end of 2018. But 2019, early 2019, was whenever we officially, filed our business paperwork with the government and set up the company and everything, and started development. Do you want to go on from there, or should I let Dominic kind of give his take?
Is Dominic still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I mean, so what's your path?
So it's pretty normal as a kid. I mean, for a mid to late 30s, pretty normal nerd thing. As a kid, we had an NES, and I played a lot of Mario 3. And then as a teenager, I had a Sega Genesis and a Nintendo 64. Played a lot of Mario 64, Mario Kart, and Ocarina of Time and stuff. So that was all my sort of childhood video game life thing, as well as some tactics games on Game Boy Advance and stuff. And as far as programming, I actually didn't really get into programming until my late 20s. Like, not seriously, I dabbled, but and then like Jared said, we came together a few years ago to just see what was up, and we saw on the horizon that the retro market is kind of swelling, and we decided to make something of it. And I think over, what was it, a weekend, we did the Pong tutorial on Nerdy Nights or something for the NES, and we're like, hey, we can make a Nintendo game. So we decided to scale that up and make something ridiculous.
Ridiculous is certainly a word for it, because we've got your game here, Former Dawn, on display here, and I do want to clarify and that this is running on real NES hardware, correct?
This video recording is through emulator, but everything you see does run on hardware. Yes.
Okay. And as far as the first question there is, what made you want to make an NES game specifically?
I'll take that one. So the NES was one of my first loves. Like when I was a kid, I had an NES. I think I got it Christmas of 1987. My mom still has the receipt for it, actually. And it was like the gaming system for me, even though the Atari was my first system and I had other computers and consoles and things. The NES just always had a special place in my heart. And like a lot of the really big, important games, like The Legend of Zelda, were, Metal Gear. That's where I found those franchises. Now, the SNES was really where my favorite genre blossomed, which is, the JRPG or just the RPG in general. And I actually had plans as a teenager to create a role-playing game either for the Super Nintendo or in the style of a Super Nintendo game for the PC. And I had a friend of mine that we ran an emulation site. I was involved in the emulation scene back in the early 90s when it really started, early to mid 90s. But it just never really materialized. And so whenever Dominic and I founded something nerdy, we didn't even necessarily found it with the idea of NES games or even retro games being our focus. We just kind of fell into that as the first project. And I said, let's do it on the NES, because I always felt like the development of the role-playing genre didn't really come into its own until the mid 90s. Which would have been in the SNES era. So, a little bit on the Genesis, but it was mostly on the Super Nintendo and then the PlayStation. Like the SNES and the PS1 were the two crown systems for this. So this is where you saw like the best Final Fantasy games, the Breath of Fire games, Parasite Eve, Suikoden, like all this stuff was on those two consoles. And that felt like a shame to me because I knew enough about the NES to have a conviction that it was possible to do much better on the NES in the role-playing genre than had been done classically, because the role-playing genre kind of developed in parallel with the technology, right? So by the time that the role-playing genre was kind of becoming perfected, the NES was already old hat. Everybody had moved on to the later consoles.
I feel like a lot of things that are like conventions of the genre or are seen as that just started as like, well, we can't do what we want to do, so this is how we're going. Like random encounters being just like, so you're walking around in the field and then suddenly.
Yeah, see, exactly. See, my two favorite role-playing games on the Super Nintendo are Chrono Trigger and Terra Enigma. Well, one's made by Square, one's made by Enix, which, the companies have now merged. At the time, they were competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And so these were kind of like antipodes to me because one was a turn-based role-playing game and the other was an action role-playing game. I loved both. Terra Enigma never came out in America. Back then, it was Europe and Japan only, as far as I know. But I got to play Terra Enigma because I was involved in the emulation scene. So I played it on early versions of either SNES 96 or SNES 90X, right? And just fell in love with it. I really loved the kind of quasi-Zelda-like action battle engine, along with like the pretty cool role-playing plot and characters and everything. So I thought, well, maybe we can do a thing like that on the NES. Like, don't go for this, in my opinion, very tedious, antiquated random battle system of the Final Fantasy and Dragon Warrior games or Dragon Quest games. I wanted something that was just more fluid, less grindy, just more enjoyable, less tedious. And so I said, let's do an action RPG. Now, what I actually settled on about a year ago or so was to have a hybrid game, which you can't see in the video that you guys are streaming right now because we haven't implemented it yet. But this game is actually a hybrid. So the most of the battles in the game are going to be real-time action, like Zelda or Terra Enigma or Illusion of Gaia. Mm-hmm. But the boss battles are going to be turn-based. So I'm kind of modeling that engine on the Breath of Fire series, like around Breath of Fire 2 or 3 level.
With the diagonal.
I'm considering that. Yeah, I haven't nailed down the UI.
Or just the mechanics.
Yeah, the basic mechanics, right? So there's not going to be any action element to the turn-based engine. Because things like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy 4 through 6, that it sort of even 7, that incorporated kind of partial real-time timing, right? They were doing that it's kind of cope, right? They were trying to like bring like more of an action-y element into something that was by its core nature turn-based. But because we already have an action battle engine, I want the turn-based engine in Formidon to be completely classical. So it's going to be strongly inspired by Breath of Fire and kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, let's say, in terms of the stats that will be used and things like that. But the two things are going to be connected. So if you have stats that you've built up, like if you've built up your sword play ability or kind of the nanotech, which is taking the place of magic in the game, it's a sci-fi role-playing game, or items that you've acquired in the action-based part of the game, those are all going to be reflected in the turn-based part of the game. So these two things are going to be completely integrated.
That could be an interesting. I mean, you have to have enough boss battles to make the effort of translating all of the upgrades you get to action skills to have an effect on the turn-based stuff.
Right. I think
it seems like it would be a lot of work, but could also be very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's fairly unique. I'm aware of one other game which is going for something similar in the NES retro community, but it's a lot smaller scale, and it's kind of a platformer combined with turn-based stuff. And the turn-based part of it does have action elements, so it's a different spin than what I'm doing with this. But yeah, we're probably going to have between 20 and 30 boss battles in the game. Roughly one per major area of the game, and that's about how many areas we're going to have by the time that the game is finalized.
Okay. And how big are you looking to have this game be?
How big? Depends on how you measure it. I mean, I'm inspired largely by Chrono Trigger and Terra Enigma, and those two games both take about 10 to 20 hours, depending on how much exploration, grinding, Easter egg hunting that you do. But good 15-hour average is about right, at least for a first playthrough. So that's about what we're targeting. So gameplay time-wise, about 15 hours, maybe 20 hours with all the extras. something like 1,000 screens, a few dozen enemy types, 50 NPCs and other characters. So that's about the scope of the game, I'd say. So something like Chrono Trigger or Terra Enigma, but on the NES.
And what size of cartridge are you working with here?
Well, that's kind of the elephant in the room, right? So in order to make all this possible, whenever we started the project, I already had in mind that in order to do the kind of thing I wanted to do on the NES, we were going to have to develop or have somebody else develop a custom memory mapper, because I felt like that really was the primary reason why these kinds of truly elaborate role-playing games had never been on the NES, is that there had never been a CD-ROM expansion for the NES the way that there had been for, say, the Genesis or the TurboGrafx 16.
Well, it was a couple generations early for that.
Well, when the Famicom came out in Japan, it was, yes, but by the time, like in the middle of the NES's heyday, the TurboGrafx 16 had a CD-ROM expansion, so there actually is precedent for that. Like I think it was 1988 was when they first did that. They were the first.
Okay, but for that to be for the NES, you're looking at a floppy disk expansion is what they had for a while, and then they figured out ways to make cartridges better than that.
Exactly, because the cartridges became cheap enough to manufacture that they no longer needed the floppy disk system to get the higher capacity games. So yeah, the concept for this game was like, well, let's see what the NES can do if we give it something like the size of a CD-ROM. That was the basic idea, and I called it the Giga Mapper, right? Either referring to a gigabyte or a gigabit. Gigabit's 128 megabytes. So it's pretty much the same scale when it comes to this kind of game. A lot of CD-ROM games were just like 100 megs or so, even on the PC. So, but we didn't know how to create a custom memory mapper when we started. For our first year on the project, we were kind of cutting our teeth on the NES hardware, kind of learning how to make stuff in SUTI 502 assembly, the ins and outs of the PPU and the CPU, and so on. And honestly, I had a hard time convincing Dominic that my vision was even possible, like electrically. Like he didn't really believe it at first. But we had the good fortune. Yeah. Speaking of Twitch, we had the good fortune of Dominic met Paul Malloy on Twitch, who is the kind of the one-man band now behind the company called Infinite NES Lives. And this guy, he doesn't create like crazy memory mappers, but he does create custom NES cartridges. And he's designed his own modern NES cartridges that use modern components and stuff. And he's doing it for other people that are far humbler in scope. Like they're kind of making, retro style games on the NES that are the same ROM size as classical NES games, like a few hundred kilobytes for the most part. But when we talked to him, I asked him if it was possible to do the kind of thing that we wanted to do with his hardware, and he said yes. So we then began to co-engineer a custom cartridge type for this game with Paul Malloy, and we kind of ended up requesting certain specs to be beefed up a little bit on the cartridge type, and we have a prototype here in the office that is kind of the proof of concept for this. So at the core of it is a fairly humble FPGA. It's about the same number of logic cells as the FPGA in a typical flash cart, like the EverDrive or EverDrive Innate Pro. I requested 1 megabyte of RAM on the cartridge because I was trying to stay reasonably period correct, and that was about what people had in the early 90s. And at first, we were just going to use a large flash ROM chip, like maybe 8 megabytes, 16 megabytes, because that would kind of get it into that size range. But it turns out that that's actually kind of expensive to do that, and it's more economical for us to take his offer of putting an SD card reader on the cartridge. Now that presents a very a very difficult technical challenge, mostly for Dominic, because he's my main man here with the low level Verilog code that we use to specify the mapper. But the game is kind of being modeled as a CD-ROM game, so it's kind of like a virtual CD-ROM expansion for the NES. That's the way that I explain it. So the data will be pulled in chunks when you go into areas kind of like Sega CD or PlayStation or the TurboGrafx 16 systems did. but everything is being computed on the NES itself. So all of the graphics that you see, all of the
computation.
all of the game state manipulation, all of the handling of the input, all of the dialogue, the battles, everything is actually being computed on the NES. It's just using this bigger cartridge type just to give it more data.
And how many cartridges are you looking to manufacture from this? Because this does sound cost reduced, sure, but still expensive.
It's actually not as expensive as you would think because of that SD card option. It's, we kind of pay for it with the difficulty that it requires to program it. Like, we don't have the luxury of programming this thing the way that most NES developers, or pretty much all of them, got to do, which is that they always had direct access to any piece of data at any point in time. There's not much of a concept of loading anything, like loading levels and stuff. That's almost a misnomer on the NES. But we have to really think hard and engineer the game engine to work with that system. So that's what makes the cartridge able to be cheap. We don't know exactly how cheap. I mean, there's been some inflation, supply chain issues, and so on. But we were looking at price points of like maybe $50 or $60, which is not bad at all. Adjusted for inflation, that's actually really cheap for an NES cartridge.
RPG, NES, and SNES, you were looking at $70, $80 back in the day.
Exactly.
On the low end.
Exactly. Chrono Trigger was $80, and adjusted for inflation from 1995 to now, that's like $140, $150.
Something like that.
Yeah, we're actually coming in lower, like much lower.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people forget how much games got cheaper when most systems started being disc-based.
Exactly. So the digital distribution of Former Dawn is obviously going to be a lot cheaper. Like, if you buy the game on Steam, we do hope to put it on the Nintendo Switch as well, if we can get approval from Nintendo to do that, or if we go through a distributor. We haven't quite worked that out yet. We kind of put out feelers for it. But that version of the game is going to be a lot cheaper, probably something like $30 or $40, maybe even lower, especially when it goes on sale. But the cartridge version will be reasonable. We're going to do a crowdfunding campaign here in the next few months, and then we'll have a better grasp on how much demand there is for the cartridges. Like, this is we're going to be manufacturing this thing in batches, kind of on demand. We can do things in batches of 50 or 100. If it got up into the thousands, then Paul Malloy told us that he'd be able to work out a deal with like a manufacturing thing in China. So we could crank out like a serious number of cartridges if there really was a lot of demand for it. But it's kind of hard to tell at this point how much demand is going to be.
Is the PC version going to be like native, or is it going to be like emulated?
Yeah, I'm actually planning on porting the game because I feel like that's the right thing to do for several reasons. I think that it's going to garner a lot more interest from the general retro gaming community if it is a real PC game. I think it turns off a lot of people to think that it's just an emulated ROM. So we're gonna port the game to the PC. It's gonna be a real PC game, and we're probably the hope is to have a widescreen edition of the game that comes out upon release on the PC or very shortly thereafter, because we're very well aware that most PC gamers want a widescreen experience because everybody has a widescreen monitor nowadays. That's one of the major reasons for porting it instead of emulating it. So it'll technically be a slightly different version of the game, but all of the assets will be identical inside the game.
Okay.
Yeah, the other main reason for porting it is there are specific technical things we're doing that really only work well on original hardware on a CRT that don't translate well to a modern LCD with emulation. And we've had to kind of trick Messin into providing output that looks more like the original experience, that we can't even record with a camera, because a CRT does things that in real life sort of trick your eyes, right? And it's an experience we've been able to replicate on almost every CRT other than broken ones. And and on every Nintendo, on every NES, on several different versions of Famicoms and Famiclones. In fact, on OLED screens as well. But yeah, so we have to. Some of the tricks we're employing for the color techniques are going to be better served doing it a different way in a PC port rather than relying on some sort of emulated trick.
Okay. And how many people are working on this?
At the moment, we have 3 full-time people and several other part-time people. That's kind of been the average for the last couple of years. I think we had a peak of 4 full-time people and 10 part-time people. So it's kind of fluctuated as what we were focusing on has changed. I think at the peak development intensity, we had about 20 people working on it.
Which is honestly, given the level of craftsmanship and detail on display, that's not a surprise.
Thank you.
And this isn't our first rodeo in terms of featuring old, new games, so to speak. But I can definitely say that this is the one with the most. How do I put this? Technical craft behind it. Like,
Yeah.
This game looks like it could almost be 16-bit.
That's kind of the goal. Yes, we're trying as hard as we can to just crank the NES up to 11. Like, see what it can really do if you push it as far as it can possibly go. Right. And like I said,
late NES did have some pretty good looking games on it.
That's true. Yeah, there were a few games.
You're doing a really good job with the colors if you're not cheating at all.
Well, it depends what you mean by cheating. So, like I said, everything that we do works on a real NES. So, in that sense, we can't cheat. We're not going to do anything on the PC version that doesn't exactly match like what you see on the real 8-bit NES hooked up to a CRT TV, right? Mm-hmm. But we are squeezing better color density and number of colors out of the system because we did figure out some hacks. That was a large part of what we did in that first year, was just kind of like play demo scene hacker group on the NES hardware. So what the big thing that they kind of materialized, I think in mid 2020, was this thing called 8x1 attributes. So one of the biggest limitations of the original 8-bit NES, Nintendo, was that the graphics chip colored the backgrounds as a blanket of squares that were 16 by 16 pixels each, called attribute areas. Mm-hmm. And each one of those little attribute areas has to pick one palette out of the 4 palettes that are specified. So you can have 13 colors on the screen simultaneously for backgrounds, and then another 12 for sprites. And then the way that the colors are mingled together is like this very coarse blanketing, right? This is what resulted in the blocky appearance of games, especially early NES games like Super Mario Bros. 1, Metroid, Kid Icarus, things like that. Man. Yeah, like they had this very coarse coloration. Well, we knew, we were largely inspired by the later memory mappers, especially MMC5, which overcame that somewhat. So they had improved it by about a factor of 4, so that each 8x8 region of the screen could be colored separately, which made it correspond directly to the tiles of the system. But there were literally no games released in America that took advantage of that. There were a few in Japan that we've looked at. So after Dominic kind of did his deep dive into the nature of the graphics chip, the PPU, it became apparent that, and actually Paul Malloy kind of intimated this as well, that you could go a little bit lower level than that. Like you could get down to the tile strip, like 8x1 region. So like that image right there, that cathedral looking building that's streaming, that's using this 8x1 attribute mode. So and so is this one right here. It's called the Snowy Swamp. So every 8x1 strip, 8 pixels wide, 1 pixel tall, in the background can be assigned a different palette. So this is kind of getting the system closer to bitmapped graphics, which is how we get the game to look more like a PC game or like a Sega Genesis game or something like that, like from that time period. That's the big hack. The other big hack is this thing that we call UCS for Ultimate Color System, which was kind of my baby, but I had quite a bit of help from Dominic to kind of get started on it. It's a way of strobing colors at 60 hertz so that on a CRT, the colors blend, and what you see is what we call a virtual colors. Like you can take something like a shade of blue and a shade of green, and if you flicker between them at 60 hertz, you'll get something like a muted cyan. That's the way it'll look to your eye, right? Now, this is tricky to do. Some people have tried to do this in the past. We're not the first ones to do it, but we're the first ones to do it in the way that we did it. So we kind of went whole hog on it, and everything in the game has been enriched with this. So that, you know, we have this automated system that takes in these higher color depth graphics and it deconstructs them into the NES phase A and phase B frame data, so that the colors are always perfectly blended everywhere on the screen, corresponding to where the camera is. And this is part of why we took so long to get this far in the game development, honestly, was that we spent a lot of time getting this right. And we now have a very automated system to where we just kind of tell our artists, hey, this is the palette that you can use. You can use this many colors. Here's how the grid works. And then they just go to town on it in Photoshop or Sprite or whatever. And then our build system does the conversion automatically. So we've taken a big load off of the artists by doing it this way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not cheating much. Hey, Patty, your Switch just showed up. Like on the stream.
I thought the capture device was off. I guess I was wrong.
Yeah, the other big sort of aspect of the color blending technique is that we have to be very careful which colors we blend.
Yes.
And that was part of what took so long to come to a good system, because if you just naively say, oh, if I flicker between black and white, I'll get gray, and you just do that, then the screen is going to be a giant buzzy mess and probably cause epilepsy for all I know. And so
yeah, I imagine it works best for relatively low contrast.
That's right.
Pairs.
Yeah, that's most of what works, and then there are some colors that blend that you don't expect to, and certain things you get out of it that you don't expect. One thing that you sort of naively would do is like, oh, just blend any two colors that are right next to each other, like blue and blue green to get a slightly bluish blue green or something. It's like, okay, that works. And as you go farther and farther away in hue, as you try to blend blue with red and blue with orange, you get a very interesting result, which is that the average is very desaturated. And for a technical person like me and a non-artist, I didn't understand really the value of that. But as artists have told me, having desaturated options to sort of go between as you're drawing provides really nice pathways for shaping things in pixel art, especially on this mustached fellow. His hair is kind of a gray blend there. And so we've had to be very meticulous, and we have, I think, 12 CRTs here from different manufacturers in different eras to make sure that the color blends that we settle on, that we allow our artists to use, aren't these things that would look horrible if you actually just play the game. And that's why we make sure that everything we do works on regular hardware. The other big thing is that it's screen real estate dependent. You can't get away with color with a lot of these color blends at full screen. You can get away with it at a tile or two. And so one area that we found that we can really get away with it is sprites and portraits. And that's why, and you're about to see him talk to his mom here, her portrait is very rich because we can get away, and in her headband there, the little floral pattern is very, very rich with these virtual colors. And that also has a bunch of sprite overlays. So once you figure out exactly where you can use these techniques, you can really make it shine. And then the backgrounds are all just native colors, but 8x1. So it's a nice mix that kind of subtly paints this picture, and gives you an overall holistic feel of something just more rich.
Be clear, that's true of these areas that are showing right now. There are other areas of the game where we use virtual colors in the background, but we do it very lightly because we want to make sure that the player doesn't see anything flickering. That's the goal. Like if you play the game, you're supposed to feel like you're just playing just a more color enriched game. You're not supposed to know that any weird CRT shenanigans are going on.
And so in the PC port, those color blends, well, in the PC port, they're just going to be the new color, the new RGB color, right? But we're resting this on saying, oh no, these colors are really that color when you play on a real CRT. That's kind of our argument.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the other thing on the main character here, Jeku, and the NPCs and stuff, we're also using multi-layering, which was done a little bit in classical NES games, but it was always done very lightly, and we're using it very heavily. So basically, every 16 by 32 character like him comes in 2 layers. One layer that shows his outlining and highlighting with like that dark brown and the bright white, and then the other layer has one of a choice of palettes for their tunic or hair or whatever things like that. So that gets us again closer to like a Super Nintendo sprite, because on the Super Nintendo, the default thing that you do is you have 15 colors for one of these things. We can achieve about 10. So we can get about 2/3 of the way there.
Okay.
Yeah, even Mega Man, his face is a layered sprite sitting in the center of a grid.
Right. The big example to me is Battletoads. If you play Battletoads on the NES, if you pay attention, you'll see that the main Toad that you play as has 6 colors, not 3. And it's because they use 2 palettes and 2 layers of sprites to achieve that. So we're doing a very similar thing, except we're also composing the multi-layering with the UCS color blending. So that's how we get from like 6 to 10, is that little bump.
Gotcha.
Now, some of these graphics, like this area right here, like they aren't as impressive because these were graphic sets that were created earlier in the project. Later on, you see more advanced stuff because we kind of developed the tech further in the tools and the build system. So we're hoping to push the rest of the game's art creation more toward the latter part of this video. Although I think this is not bad. It's pretty good by NES standards.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is just our copious use of ROM space, right? We're just throwing more data at it. So
yeah, the NES, no normal NES cartridge would be able to process all of these complicated instructions and still have stuff move smoothly.
Actually, that's not true. Like you could do it, but your whole game would be spent on one area. Like if you took a cartridge, yeah, like you could dedicate a whole cartridge back then to just like the intro town on this game called Garrosh, and it could handle it. But then you wouldn't have any room for the rest of the game. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how we look at it. It's like, well, it's like having a stack of classical cartridges, basically. It's like insert cartridge 2, insert cartridge 3, except that you don't have to actually do that.
Although the Japanese kids kind of had to, because they had please flip to side B for the disc system.
That's true. Yeah. And I think that there may have been some games that were multiple discs. I'm not sure about that, though. That certainly was the case in a lot of other classical consoles. That had floppy disk attachments. You have multiple floppies.
Right. And About how complete is the game at this point in time?
It kind of depends on how you measure it. I'd say in terms of the programming, we're probably, I don't know, 40-50% there, because a lot of the really hard work has been done. I mean, believe me, there's Dominic could explain it more, but there's a lot going on, and like what you see right now on the video that's being streamed, that getting those effects to work that way on the NES is extremely challenging, and there's a lot of 6502 assembly that has to be razor sharp with its timing to like kind of dance with the memory mapper and make sure there's no graphical glitches, because it's been one of my just pet peeves about a lot of NES games, that there's glitchy graphics in them, and so I've insisted on not having that. So that's taken some extra development times to avoid all those little glitches, like flickering little lines and pixels and things like that. So yeah, like in terms of the game engine, probably 40-50%. And in terms of the backgrounds, I think it's about 15%. After the crowdfunding campaign, a lot of what we're going to be doing is just me playing art director and managing the work of multiple different artists to kind of flesh out the worlds. I do have the world map sketched out. I have the plot sketched out. I've got almost all of the characters sketched out that are important to the plot. The lore is pretty well established. So all of that stuff is probably like 75% done. So it's like, I don't know, overall, we're probably 33% done. But that's because we need crowdfunding to hire more staff to flesh out the ideas. The groundwork has been done.
And before we get into the crowdfunding campaign, we haven't really talked about the game itself, so to speak.
Oh, you're right.
You know, the actual plot, who you are, what you're doing, what you're questing for, that sort of thing.
Sure. So, what's the spoiler meter going to be at for this?
I mean,
I think that's more up to you than it is to us.
yeah.
Okay, I'll just give some spoilers then. So basically, you start the game and you're kind of in this idyllic kind of medieval or Renaissance level town, as a typical role-playing game often is. And you play a hunter. That's why he's got this bow and arrow thing. He's got the quiver on his back. We don't actually show the bow and arrow mechanic, but we do have it. We have the graphics for that already. So you play this hunter who's also he's kind of a amateur scientist, tinkerer. So he's got like a little secret laboratory in his house, and he examines a lot of the animals that he catches. So he catches animals and kills them and sells their body parts for money, and he serves the kind of the government of this planet that he lives on. It's called the Organization, just this generic term. And what he discovers is that when he looks at these various animals that he has trapped, there's just something wrong with the world. Like he can tell that his species doesn't seem to share an evolutionary history with these other animals. And of course, the official narrative on the planet is that they evolve naturally. So there's nothing to see here. But the more and more he kind of investigates this, the more suspicious he becomes. And one day, he is out hunting and he stumbles into this ravine and he finds this derelict kind of underground bunker that's set into this mountainside that really shouldn't exist because it's very high tech, and he doesn't really understand what that means because the level of technology of his civilization is like kind of medieval or Renaissance, right? But when he walks in here, and it is like I think around minute 9 in the video, it'll come back up again. Whenever he walks in this facility, there's computer monitors everywhere. There's electronic gadgets and fancy doors that he's never seen and things like that. Not to mention like electric lights and all that stuff. And he's greeted by this supercomputer AI that runs the facility, and the AI tells him that he is a member of a derivative species of a precursor species that were called human. So he's not actually a human. He is his species has been bioengineered to survive on this planet that doesn't have oxygen in the atmosphere. So they like recycle their oxygen with specialized cellular machinery that just kind of like splits water into hydrogen and oxygen and recaptures waste products. Because they were supposed to be part of a terraforming mission. The game is called Former Dawn because former is short for the term terraformer. So these people were engineered to go to this planet and then terraform the atmosphere and plant life that the humans could survive on. And the humans are mostly in cryo-freeze while this has been happening. But he doesn't know like what happened because there aren't any more humans. He's never seen a human. Nobody has ever heard of the humans. And the organization has covered up the truth, obviously, or they don't know what happened, right? It turns out that there was a conspiracy to cover up the truth. And that's a lot of what the game is about, is Jakku leaves his hometown. He goes out into the world trying to pull on that thread and find out like what the truth is. Because even this AI that he meets doesn't know everything because he doesn't have a body. He's just the AI that runs this one facility, but he knows enough of the real history to get Jakku interested in finding out the rest of the truth. So it's this kind of epic adventure of discovering the truth, getting the organization pissed off. They go after Jakku. They're trying to capture him. You actually do get captured at one point. You escape. There's a lot of kind of sneaking type missions, like kind of stealth things. But it's a mix of like kind of stealth and action whenever it comes to confronting the organization. So you end up meeting this human girl. Well, she's in her 20s, who turns out to be the last living human, but she doesn't even know that. She thinks that she's a former. And they keep her underground, and her name is Ava. We don't actually show her in this video clip, but she's on some of the things that we've tweeted out on our Twitter account. So you team up with Ava, and the game is like a typical role-playing game where you have multiple members in your party, right? So she's in the battle engine. She's very much a part of the plot because she is high up in the organization, and Jakku is low down. So she's able to know, she shares some information with Jakku that he never would have gotten on his own, and kind of helps him accomplish his mission of uncovering the truth. So that's the overall arc of the game.
Okay. And what's being done in terms of the music?
Yeah, we're not quite ready to announce who it is that's composing the soundtrack, but it's someone very famous. They don't want their name to be on this until we've kind of developed the tech behind it enough to really showcase it, and like we're ready for the crowdfunding campaign. So we're planning on announcing who that is when we launch the crowdfunding campaign. Now, on the tech side,
I will do you the favor of not jokingly guessing famous music people names.
You might get,
just in case.
Honestly, yeah. you might guess who this is because they have done the soundtracks for AAA game house games. Like this person's a big deal, but I don't want to get into that. The underlying tech that they're going to use is again inspired by Japanese Nintendo games, like Famicom games that had special synth chips in them. Like the Japanese version of Castlevania 3 did this. Lagrange Point did that with a kind of an FM synth chip called VRC7. There were a bunch of these in Japan. We never got that in America, even though we could have, because we do have an expansion port on the bottom of the NES where if you just stick like a little plug up inside there, like it enables this expansion audio, but for some reason they just never did it back in the day. So all of the NES games that we ever got in America had just the base level audio synth of the 2A03 CPU APU combo. But what we're going to do is we're going to emulate Yamaha FM synthesis. Similar to VRC7, but more advanced. It's actually like basically the same FM synth core that's in the Sega Genesis. It was in the Sega Genesis. It was in the Neo Geo, and I think it was in the PC-98 computers in Japan. There were a line of computers and consoles that had the same like Yamaha FM synth, and we're going to use that and we're going to use Furnace Tracker to create the soundtrack where it uses both chips. So it's a multi-chip soundtrack. It's going to use the native NES sounds as the basis for the sound, and then it's going to layer in kind of background and harmonics and things like that with the extra channels.
That does sound very musical. Like,
yeah, it's going to be very polyphonic. That's right. It's going to have a lot of channels. Yeah.
Yeah, because the NES does not have a lot of those. Like, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like the stock NES is 3 channels.
5 technically. There's 3 primary ones. So you've got 2 pulse waves or square waves, as they're sometimes called, and triangle waves, like 2 pulse, 1 triangle. But then you also have the noise channel, which they did use for things like snare drums and stuff like that, especially like in military type games like Metal Gear. And then you've got this DPCM channel. So that's we're actually going to leverage that DPCM channel in a fairly unique way. Like, again, everything we're doing is just like this insane effort to hack the hell out of the NES hardware. So we're doing that with the audio too. What we're going to do for people that have top loader NESs, which don't have that expansion port, is we're actually going to feed the audio through that DPCM channel 1 byte at a time with very precise timing. Now, it will have a downgraded sample rate. You know, if you have the front loader NES, you'll get the full sample rate of about 31.5 kilohertz, which is very high quality for the NES. And if you have the top loader, it'll be about 8 kilohertz, which is, you know, pretty good. It's like the level of like the Game Boy Advance, but not as good as like the Super Nintendo or PlayStation. So again, it's kind of quasi 16-bit, kind of in between 8-bit and 16-bit eras.
12-bit.
Yeah, I've jokingly called it that before.
And, well, you've touched upon it a couple of times here, but I suppose it's a good time to ask about the details of the upcoming, I don't know if you're using Kickstarter or Indiegogo, the crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah, we're going to use Indiegogo, at least for the first one. We may do a Kickstarter campaign later, kind of like when Morphcat made the game Micro Mages. They did both, right? I think they did a Kickstarter first and then an Indiegogo, but we're going to do it the other way around. So we're going to have an Indiegogo campaign first half of 2023 to get the, like I said, the pre-orders for the cartridges and to try to fund the rest of the art for the game. So we're hoping to launch that probably around March or April. I think it'll be a 1-month campaign. We don't have the campaign page up, but we do plan on having at least a stub of that up so people can look at it before the end of this year. But it won't launch until next year.
And how much are you looking to raise?
Well, what have you got? I mean, if we got something like $250,000 from it, that would be quite healthy. I think that would get us where we want to be. If we got less than that, we'll still finish the game, but it'll probably just take longer. If we got more than that, then we would be able to really do something that I haven't even touched on yet, which is full motion video. So one of the things that we have made possible, and we invite you to stream this if you want to in a minute, is our FMV tech for the NES. So we, right around the same time that we did the 8x1 attributes in the memory mapper, we also figured out how to do full frame rate, full screen, full motion video on the NES. But it's very difficult artistically because you do still have to struggle with the attribute grid, or you have to have a low color count, or you do some kind of in between. So it requires kind of technical artistry mixed with classical training in animation. And we know that that's going to be very expensive. Like my dream is to hire somebody from like Don Bluth Studios, that's like a veteran animator or something like that. Maybe even ex-Disney, somebody. But that's just not going to happen unless we have like a lot of funding. So that's kind of our stretch goal, I guess you could say. is to have FMV cutscenes in the game. We're already going to be using FMV for some of the synthetic parts of the games. Like, we're going to fake having Mode 7, like from the SNES, on the NES, and we're going to use our FMV tech to make it look like that in a couple of key places, like on the world map and things like that. But in terms of like full-blown, like cartoon style, not necessarily anime, but something like that, kind of cutscenes, then we would need the extra funding to hire the animators for that.
And what's the monetary goal being set at here?
Yeah, I haven't really decided that yet, so I don't think I have an answer for that. Indiegogo is preferable over Kickstarter because of this topic. Because on Kickstarter, it's all or nothing. Like so if you set a goal of $250,000 and you only got 248,000, then you get nothing. The project's done, right? On Indiegogo, you have the option of taking whatever you get, even if it doesn't technically meet the goal. So, not quite sure. We're probably going to set it somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000 as the goal, but haven't decided yet.
And what about rewards and tiers? Have they been sussed out yet?
A little bit, yeah. So, like I mentioned, the FM synthesis. So, one of the things that we're going to do as kind of like one of the top level tiers or perks is to get a special edition of the cartridge that has a genuine Yamaha FM chip soldered on it. So it will not be using any kind of like FPGA emulation for the audio. The audio will be pure, original, authentic Yamaha audio. Now that means a lot to some audiophiles out there. I think most people don't care. So it's kind of an ideal thing to use for the top tier, right? And then there's going to be typical kind of swag, like autographed world maps and plush dolls and things like that, or pewter piece figurines from the game, things like that. That's the kind of stuff that we expect to do. Maybe even do the kind of thing that Sabotage has done, where you get to have a character in the game model after you. That's an idea. So some of this is in flux, but some of it's been decided.
Well, I suppose there's still a bit of time left to figure out the details.
Mm-hmm.
For all the work that you've put into this, it still sounds like this game is a fair few years away from completion.
Yeah. Optimistically, I think we could probably get it done in about a year and a half after the crowdfunding campaign, but realistically, probably more like 2 years. A big part of that is we've had some setbacks. Like we had COVID-19 really disrupted things in a lot of ways. We moved headquarters across the country from Texas to Tennessee. My wife just delivered our third child, so like I'm kind of on paternity leave right now from the project. But things are picking up, and we're going to get back into full swing pretty soon here. But we had hoped to finish the game before when we now think that we'll be able to finish it by. But we're going to keep chugging along.
Well, we certainly wish you luck in that endeavor.
Thank you.
Right. So I'll see if my colleagues here have any last questions to ask you.
I think I'm good.
I think I've asked all my questions.
I'm not sure that's a good thing or a bad thing.
No, it's just we are running low on time and we have to wrap up.
Oh, I see.
Yes. So, Jared and Dominic, I do want to thank you both for taking time out of your schedule and joining us here this evening to tell us all about your game. Like I said, it's definitely impressive for what is on display so far. And we certainly look forward to seeing how things shape up, and hopefully your campaign will go swimmingly.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And thanks for having us on.
Yes,
No
thank you very
problem.
much.
No problem. Yeah. So I don't think there's any place to wish list or pre-order Former Dawn right now.
No, but you can follow us on Twitter to follow along, and we post everything there.
Okay. What's your Twitter handles?
Well, the company Twitter is something nerdy without a G. I'll post
Okay.
it here. Yeah.
All right. So you can go and follow them there to keep track and see new updates of the game. Like I said, I'm eager to see what the future holds for former Dawn. Like, right. So that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. So the week ahead, let's see. We do have a Friday show planned. Let me see here. I hate it when I don't have the right window open. But we are supposed to have Ilya Svanzide of Fulcrum Publishing on the program on Friday. They did get in touch on Monday, though not fully, as they had to go take a conference call and they never got back to me. Hopefully, it is looking like we are having a Friday show, though. And we do have a new episode of Moonhawk Studios Presents happening in about 10 minutes. So we should really run this along, and until next time. And I know this isn't our final broadcast for the season, but it could potentially be the case. So I'll just wish you all a happy holiday, whatever you celebrate. And, in case we don't broadcast on Friday, we will see you in the new year.